Welcome back, children. Today we are going to study a very new chapter, that is labor. This is the second factor of production that we are going to deal with. So before beginning, let us understand the meaning of labor. Labor is the physical or the mental effort that is exerted by a human being for the purpose of production of a good or services which generates an income. So, when we consider labor in economics, we need to consider two most vital things. First of all, it is a non-voluntary work. That means it has to generate an income. Only then it will be considered as a labor in economics. Say supposedly your mother cooking at home is a voluntary work. So, it is not considered to be labor in economics. But if a cook cooks at home, that service will be considered as a labor because it is generating income. Imagine yourself singing at home. That is a voluntary service. So in that case, you are not paid. So that is not labor. But if a professional singer sings and earns, then that will be considered as a labor in economics. So two things are very vital when we consider labor in economics. I'm repeating it again. That is, it has to be a human labor. That means no animal will be considered as to be performing or doing a labor, even if it is a laborious work or a physical work for the animal. Next, labor is basically done to produce commodities or services, and in turn it has to generate an income. Next, we will distinguish between physical and mental labor. When we consider a physical labor here, more of the physical ability is exerted rather than the mental abilities, like that of the work of a coolie. But when we consider mental labor, we are going to consider more of the mental capacities and less of the physical work. That is, say, for example, the work of a lawyer or a teacher. Now let's understand the characteristics of labor. The very first characteristics that we are going to deal with is labor cannot be separated from the laborer. Like you can separate land from a landowner, you can separate a capital from a capital owner. Capital, you can talk about machineries, but you cannot separate the capacity of a person's work from that person. So labor can never be separated from the laborer. Next, almost synonymous to the previous point, labor cannot be accumulated. You can go on buying land and you can accumulate land. You can go on buying raw materials or machineries and accumulate capital. But it's not possible for you to accumulate the capacity of your work. Gradually, it will perish with the passage of time. Next, we talk about labor supply varies over time. The first explanation to this particular point will be able-bodied adults. That means the more physically able a particular group of people is, that means if the population has more of healthy people who are within the working range, that means within 15 years to 60 years, then there will be more of labor supply. If this particular group of people is less, then the labor supply will be less. One more explanation can also be given to this. In the short run, that means within a short span of time, labor supply cannot be increased to a huge extent. It can be increased, but not to a huge extent. Even the climatic conditions also determine the labor supply. This has to be remembered. The more critical is the climate, the lesser amount of labor supply can be produced. Now, when we talk about labor supply, we talk about man hours. That means the working hours of a human being. Okay, so in that case, if the climate is not suitable, then the person will not be able to sustain more working hours. Okay. Now the next characteristics, Human labor carries an element of judgment. This is very true. You cannot expect land or capital to judge the work that is being done on them. But a human being is capable of judging his or her own work which he is producing. That means he can judge the physical or the mental effort that he is putting into labor or work. Next, labor is mobile. Labor can travel from one place to another in search of job or in search of better opportunities, better wage rates, and if there are wage differences within two particular areas, then also people move in and out of the area. Okay, so let's move on to the next characteristics of labor. What do we see in the next characteristics of labor? That is, labor has alternative uses. True, there are various types of labors. Skilled labor. Skilled laborers are the ones who are specifically trained in their particular work. So they will be completely efficient, okay, and they will be capable of doing only one particular type of work which they are skilled in. Unskilled workers usually are the ones who can do any sort of work without being trained. That means they are not trained enough, so they are given with all the menial sort of works which they can handle. Next, labor generates income, which are already specified while explaining the definition of labor, that it has to generate an income. Next, labor is both the means and ends of production. This is very, very true. Means of production means the laborers help in the production of commodities, and ends of production means when the commodities are produced, it is a laborer who uses it, okay, to satisfy their wants. The last characteristics is labor differs in efficiency. If it is a skilled labor, it will be more efficient. If it is an unskilled, it is less efficient. Where technology is better, there the laborers are going to be more efficient. If the temperature or the climate suits the laborers, then laborer will be more efficient. Okay, so labor also differs in efficiency. Other than this, you have to study the difference between land and labor. Next, we come to supply of labor in an economy. Supply of labor in an economy, as I said just a few minutes back, means that supply of man days or man hours, you can say. That means number of working hours which a particular person can put in a single day. Say a man is capable of putting in 8 hours of work in a day. Okay. If the labor supply needs to be increased, then that number of working hours can be increased to 9 hours a day. So labor supply automatically increases. And if it needs to be decreased, then the number of working hours can be decreased and labor supply automatically decreases. There are certain factors which affects the supply of labor. Let's see what are those. Population, first one. Population, when we consider it, we have to keep it in mind that larger the population, larger will be the labor supply. But one thing has to be considered in this. Population can increase with the non-working members also. That means the people who are of a lower age than 15 and the people who are of an age above 60. Then the labor supply cannot be increased because these people fall under the dependent group. They don't earn. Means their age group doesn't help them or is not suitable for them to earn. So population, once it increases, technically we can consider it that labor supply will definitely increase. Next, out-migration and in-migration. Out-migration means when a particular area sees people migrating out of it, people moving out of that particular area, then it's known as out-migration. In that case, what basically happens is that labor supply decreases. And the area which sees in migration, that means people moving in that area, actually sees more of labor supply. I did talk about this to you just now, age structure, that if the number of people within a certain age is more, then the labor supply is more. That means the working age is considered to be from 15 to 60 years. So if the number of people within that particular age group is more, then definitely the labor supply will be more. Next, able-bodied persons. Able-bodied persons are given with an way of being judged through daily, that is disability adjusted life year. Suppose a person lives for say around 80 years. Out of that, because he is not physically able, he has been working for only 30 years. So in that case, his daily is only 30 years. But say another person living for the same number of years, say 80 years, but his physical capacity enables him to work for 50 years. That means he gives in 20 more years than the previous person. So the ability of a person to do, or the capacity of a person to do the work, makes him more able, or you can say helps him to supply more of labor. Workforce participation. This is a very true concept in today's generation, that is wish to work. There are many such people who wish not to work if they are not given with some conditions or certain rules are not fulfilled for them, like wage. If they are not satisfied with the wage structure in the industry in which they want to work, they will not work. Okay, so in that case, the labor force participation becomes less. Okay, next point is wage rate. We all know where wages are more, people usually tend to move to those areas. So if wage is more in urban areas, people will tend to migrate to urban areas. And if wages are more in some specific cities, people try to migrate there. So more the wage rate, more will be the supply of labor. In this particular case, I want to explain something to you, that is the backward bending supply curve of labor. When I'll teach supply to you, I'll also explain this particular thing again. This is an exception to the law of supply. What we basically see in this graph is, in the x-axis we see labor supply, that means number of working hours, and in the y-axis we see wage rate. What we have to see is, in the first instance from O to W0, the labor supply increases with the increase in wage rate. But after a certain time span, after the wage rate of W0, the labor supply gradually decreases. Now, why does this happen? First of all, human being is not a machine. That means human cannot work for 24 hours a day. He cannot supply labor continuously for 24 hours. But even if the wage rate increases, he cannot work for more than a stipulated working hour period, which his body will be capable of sustaining. Plus, say a person earns 10 rupees per hour. Okay, so for earning 100 rupees, he has to work 10 hours a day. When his wage rate increases to 15 rupees, even if he works for 8 hours a day, he is capable of earning 120 rupees. So at a certain time we see that with the increase in wage rate, working hours decreases. So this too can be given as an explanation as to why the supply of labor first increases and then bends backward. Now I'm going to show you how to draw this type of curves. I think I have already told you, when you draw nonlinear curves, it's better for you people to use used refills of this sort, then the curves usually come in a proper manner. Now let's see how we use it. What is given here is, we have been given with the axis this is the wage rate, and this is the labor supply. Okay. Now what we see in nature is the backward bending supply curve. You will hold your refill in this manner and you will draw the backward bending supply curve. See. Clear? Now, what we have explained, that to a certain extent, with the increase in wage, labor supply increases. After that, what do we see is labor supply gradually falls. So till wage rate W0, labor supply increases, and after that it falls. According to your definition and explanation in the book, it is taken to be 10 hours. It differs from country to country. Clear? Okay, so let's move on. The next part which we are going to see is government regulation. Government can also regulate the labor supply. That means if the government wishes to increase the working hours for the laborers, the government can basically do it. So if number of working hours increases, the labor supply also increases. Next we will talk about the efficiency of workers. More efficient are the workers, more skilled they are, they can put in more efforts. Rather, they can finish off their work more efficiently within a small span of time. So, efficient workers usually put in more labor supply. Next, we move on to another graph where we see occupation specific factors. This has to be the thing in the new generation. Wherever the generation, or you can say that wherever the wage rate in whichever industry is more, people tend to study or be skilled in that particular profession and continue with that job. Say engineers, they are paid more. This is a concept, and so definitely people go on for studying more of engineering. Previously, hotel management was not in vogue, but now it is a word of the day. Why? Because people have come to know that the payments in this particular industry have increased in leaps and bounds. So people tend to put in more effort in studying that particular occupational skill. So what we consider is that wherever the wage will be more, that means with the increase in wage, supply of labor is taken to be increasing. Okay, this is different from the previous graph which I have shown. Why is it different? Because the previous graph was considered with respect to the number of working hours and wage rate. Here, labor supply, we are not considering the number of working hours. Yes, when we mention labor supply, working hours will come into existence, but this part, this particular rising part will show that whichever occupation pays more wage, labor supply will be more. Individual laborers will be tending to study that particular skill so that they are being paid with the latest amount of money in the job market. Okay. I suppose you have understood the graph. See, wage increases from W0 to W1 and labor also increases from L0 to L1. Next, the last point which we are going to explain today is mobility of labor. That means the capacity or the you can say like want of the labor, or the labor wishes to move from one place to another. There are certain reasons for that. And when there is an in and out migration, I have explained this in the previous point, that in migration and out migration can lead to increase or decrease in supply of labor. Now, why is there a migration? Usually what we see that the growth in agriculture is not much. In that case, if number of people are absorbed more in agriculture, then the labor supply actually decreases. Next, rural unemployment. Rural areas basically see unemployment more in number. Why? Because traditional industries which are based mainly in rural areas have declined. More like handlooms, handicrafts, you can say cottage industries. So, rural unemployment is more in number, and such as the case, people tend to migrate to urban areas in search of jobs. One more important thing, rural urban wage gap. Rural urban wage gap means the difference between the wage rates between a rural area and an urban area for the same work. As for the same work, what I mean is that for the same work, a rural worker will be paid less and an urban worker will be paid more. So that induces a person to move from a rural to an urban area. Next, better future prospects. Yes, urban area sees better colleges, better schools, better job opportunities. So people tend to move from rural areas to urban areas. So that is it for today. We are going to continue with the next part of the chapter in the next class. Thank you, children.